Montana Territory, April 1879. The wind was sharp that night, cutting through the cracks in the cabin walls as if it had something to say. In the still dark before dawn, the cowboy stepped off his horse, boots crunching softly in the frost-covered dirt. He tied the reins to the rail and looked up at the broken porch. The place looked tired, sad even, but he was not here for the house, he was here for her. Inside, the fire had long since gone out. Evelyn O'Conner lay curled on a straw mattress, her face soft in sleep, unaware of what had been done to her. Harland Zane stepped through the door slow, careful not to wake her just yet. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair and let out a breath. The man who had sold her husband was long gone, riding south with money in his pockets and no right to his name. Harland crouched beside the bed and reached out, his hand light on her shoulder. "Ma'am," he said gently, voice low, steady. "Evelyn, I need you to wake up now." She stirred, eyes fluttering open, confused, then tense in an instant, drawing back from him. What are you doing in here?" Her voice cracked, sleep still thick in it, fear rushing in behind. Harland raised both hands slowly. "Name's Harland Zane. I came to get you out of here. You're free now." She blinked hard, eyes darting to the door, to the empty space beside her. "Where is Matthew?" "Gone," Harland said. "He sold you to a man in Helena. I paid him more to walk away before he got that far." Evelyn stared at him like he had spoken a different language. "He sold me." Her voice broke on the last word. Harland nodded once. "While you were sleeping." She sat up, blanket clutched to her chest. Her hands were shaking. "And you bought me?" "No," he said quickly. "I bought your freedom." Evelyn's lip trembled. She looked down at her hands, then the room. "Why?" Harland hesitated. "Because no woman should be sold like cattle, and because I knew what kind of man he was. I saw him slap you in the dry goods store last fall, then smile like it was nothing. I should have stepped in then." She looked up at him. "Why now?" "Because I heard what he was planning," Harland said. "He bragged about it at the saloon 2 nights ago. Said you were too much trouble and he'd make something off you yet." Evelyn's breath hitched. She swung her legs over the bed and stood, her knees unsteady. "What am I supposed to do now?" "I have a ranch west of Miles City," Harland said. "You can come with me, no strings. Just a roof and work if you want it, or I will get you to the nearest town and you can decide from there." Evelyn looked at him, really looked. His face was weathered by sun and trail dust, but not hard. His eyes were steady, kind. She did not know this man. But somehow she trusted him more than she had ever trusted Matthew. "I need to pack," she said. Harland nodded, stepping back so she could move around the room. She took only a satchel, a few clothes, and a locket from the mantel. No hesitation. Nothing else in the house was hers, not truly. They rode out just as the sky began to pale with morning. Evelyn kept silent most of the way, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but when her horse stumbled slightly, Harland reached out, steadying the animal with a calm hand. She looked at him and gave a small nod. It was not much. But it was something. By late afternoon, they reached a wide stretch of land nestled against the Yellowstone River. Fences ran along the hills, and cattle dotted the field below. A small house stood near a barn, smoke curling from the chimney. Evelyn looked at it, then at him. "This is yours," Harland nodded. "Built it myself. Took 5 years." She swung down from her horse, legs stiff. "Why did you really come for me?" He hesitated, then said, "Because you looked like someone who had not had a choice in a long time. And I wanted to give you one." Evelyn turned toward the house. "Then I choose to stay, for now." Harland smiled just a little. "Fair enough." That night she sat on the porch while he fixed dinner. The sky turned orange and then deep blue. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and looked out over the land. When he brought her a plate, he did not sit too close. He just passed it to her and sat on the steps. "I do not know what I am supposed to feel," she said after a while, angry, relieved. "Lost. You can feel all of it," Harland said. She looked at him, her eyes softer now. "And you, why are you alone out here?" He took a breath, staring at the horizon. "I lost someone long time ago. After that, I did not see the point in chasing much else." She was quiet a moment. "And now," he looked at her then. Now maybe I am starting to see different. Evelyn held his gaze, the wind tugging at her hair. She felt something shift, slow and unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Later that night, as she lay in the guest room, she touched the locket resting against her collarbone. Inside was a picture of her mother long gone. She whispered a thank you to the quiet night. In the room across from hers, Harland sat at the edge of his bed, thinking about the way she had looked at him. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but like she was trying to understand something new. He reached for the lamp, then paused. He smiled just a little to himself. Maybe, for the first time in a long while, he was not alone either. The first week passed without ceremony. Evelyn rose early, dressed in the quiet of her small bedroom, and helped where she could, feeding the chickens, sweeping the porch, hauling water from the pump behind the shed. Harland didn't hover. He gave her space, offered quiet instruction when needed, and left her to find her own rhythm. One morning, a little after sunrise, Evelyn stood at the edge of the corral fence, watching Harland run a chestnut mare along the rail. The mare was skittish, sharp-eyed, and quick to bolt. Harland didn't press her. He moved slow, patient, letting her circle him until she stopped on her own. "You're good with her," Evelyn called. Harland rested his arm on the top rail. "She belonged to my brother's boy. He passed last winter." "I'm sorry." He nodded once, then looked at the mare. "She hasn't trusted anyone since, not even me, not really." Evelyn turned her gaze toward the pasture. "Maybe she's waiting to see who stays." Harland didn't answer, but the set of his shoulders shifted slightly, like her words had reached someplace deeper than she meant them to. That evening, Evelyn chopped carrots at the kitchen table while Harland cleaned his saddle tack near the stove. The air smelled of leather oil and thyme, and outside the last light of day stretched long over the grass. Without looking up, Harland spoke. "You ever work with horses?" Evelyn paused. "Once. Before I was married, my uncle let me help with his team. They were old, gentle things. I used to sneak them apples." "You want to try with the mare?" She looked at him, uncertain. "Would she even let me near?" "She might. You don't carry a heavy hand." Evelyn set the knife down. "I'd like that." The next afternoon, Harland stood back while Evelyn approached the mare with a halter in her hand. Her steps were slow, even. She didn't reach too soon, didn't speak. Just let the mare watch her inch by inch. When her fingers touched the mare's neck, there was a pause in the air, like something fragile had been offered and taken. Harland let out a long breath. "She's never let anyone get that close before." Evelyn smiled, just barely. "She reminds me of someone." The days stretched longer with spring coming in earnest. Snowmelt rushed through the creek behind the barn, and meadowlarks began to call from the cottonwoods. Evelyn found herself humming under her breath as she swept the porch one afternoon. She caught herself, surprised by the sound of her own contentment. That night, she brought Harland a folded shirt she'd mended where the seams had pulled loose. She held it out without a word, and he took it, studying the tiny stitches. "Didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." He held the shirt in his hands a moment longer. "Thank you." She nodded and turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "What was her name?" Harland looked up. "Who? The one you lost." He set the shirt down. "Clara." Evelyn stepped back inside just enough to meet his eyes. "You don't have to tell me more. I just didn't want her to be forgotten." Harland's voice was quiet. "She died of consumption. We weren't married long." Evelyn didn't say anything, just gave a small nod and left him to the silence. A few nights later, a storm rolled in from the west. The wind howled through the eaves and rain battered the roof in heavy bursts. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lit a single lamp and sat by the window, watching lightning split the sky. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Harland stood there, his hair damp, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. "You all right?" She nodded. "Just listening." He hesitated, then stepped inside and handed her a mug. "Chamomile, grew it out near the shed." She took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." Harland didn't sit, but lingered at the window. "Storms used to scare me when I was a boy. My pa would tell me thunder was just the clouds arguing about who got to water the earth first." Evelyn smiled. "That's kinder than what my mother used to say." "What was that?" She said thunder was the voice of God reminding us not to forget him. Harland looked out at the dark fields. Maybe it's both. They stood in silence for a moment, the storm raging outside, warm lamplight casting soft shadows across the room. I'm not sure what comes next, Evelyn said quietly. Harland turned toward her. You don't have to know yet. She looked down at the mug in her hands. You keep giving me space like I'm going to run, he met her eyes. I give you space so you know you don't have to. Evelyn didn't look away. Would you be all right if I stayed? His answer came without pause. Yes. When he left her room, the storm was starting to pass, rain softening to a whisper. Evelyn set down her cup and lay back beneath the quilt. For the first time in years, she slept through the night. By late May, the land had turned green with promise. Calves bawled in the lower pasture, and fresh shoots pushed up through the rows Harland had tilled near the creek. Evelyn spent her mornings in the garden kneeling in the dirt, fingers caked with soil and root, learning which plants liked sun and which ones needed shade. Her back ached by midday, but the kind of ache she could respect, the kind that came from making something grow. Harland had been gone since dawn, checking fence lines on the northern ridge. It wasn't unusual, but Evelyn had started to notice the stillness when he wasn't nearby. Not just the quiet, but the way it settled differently in her chest. She didn't speak of it. When his horse finally came into view, hooves kicking up dust along the ridge trail, she stood from the garden, rose and brushed her hands on her skirt. He swung down with a weariness that hadn't been there yesterday. You're limping, she said, eyeing his left boot. Stepped wrong on shale coming down from the ridge, he admitted. Nothing to fuss over. Let me see. He blinked at her, surprised, but didn't argue. She led him to the porch and sat him on the bench while she fetched a basin. She rolled up his pant leg without ceremony, revealing a swollen ankle already turning deep purple. Harland winced as her fingers pressed gently along the bone. You said nothing to fuss over. Didn't feel like much at the time. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. You always underplay things, he gave a low laugh. Only when someone's watching. She wrapped the ankle tightly with a strip of muslin and tied it off at the back. You'll stay off it for 2 days. No riding, no repairs. I've got cattle to move. Then you'll teach me how, she said. I can ride. Harland looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. The next morning, he sat at the fence line while Evelyn rode the bay gelding across the pasture, guiding the cattle with short calls and slow pressure from her knees. She kept her back straight, her eyes ahead. When one of the steers broke off toward the trees, she circled wide, cutting it off before it could bolt. Harland watched, arms crossed over his chest. You ride like someone who's had to fight for space. Evelyn didn't smile, but her eyes flicked toward him. Maybe I have. That afternoon, thunderheads gathered over the eastern hills. Not a storm, but the kind of heat that pressed against the back of the neck. Evelyn soaked a cloth and draped it across Harland's ankle where he rested in the shade of the barn. She sat beside him on the ground, back against the wall. I found a letter in the loft, she said quietly, tucked behind a rafter. Harland turned his head. What kind of letter? It was addressed to your brother. You never sent it. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, I wrote it the day Clara passed. Thought I owed him something, telling him myself, but I couldn't find the words. You told me her name, Evelyn said. That was more than I expected. I didn't want her forgotten. She's not. They sat in the hush of the barn, flies buzzing near the rafters, the smell of hay and old wood wrapping around them. Harland shifted, his voice low. You ever think about what comes next? If you had a choice. I do have a choice now, he nodded slowly. Then what would you want if no one else was deciding? Evelyn looked toward the open doors where sunlight filtered through cottonwood leaves. I'd want soil under my nails and no fear in my chest. I'd want to wake up and know the day ahead belongs to me, and maybe, if it was right, someone to share the quiet with. Harland didn't move. You'd have all that here if you wanted it. Evelyn pulled her knees close, resting her chin atop them. I've never built anything lasting. Not really? Then maybe this is where you start. That night, she didn't go straight to her room. She lingered on the porch after supper, the lanterns inside casting a warm glow through the front windows. Harland joined her without a word, lowering himself onto the bench with a careful breath. His ankle was still stiff. Evelyn watched the stars blink to life overhead. I used to think peace was something that happened when everything else stopped, when the noise went quiet. But maybe it's just knowing where you are is where you're meant to be. Harland leaned back, his shoulder close to hers. I think it's both. She turned her head toward him, searching his face in the dim light. You've been patient with me. I didn't want to take anything from you, he said. Only offer what I had. She reached out then, slowly, and placed her hand atop his, not grasping, just resting there. Harland didn't move, but something in his jaw loosened. I'm not afraid here, she whispered. He looked at her then, his voice quiet. Neither am I. The porch remained still as the night deepened, the horizon soft with the hush of summer's edge. And for the first time, Evelyn let herself believe in something steady, something that wouldn't be taken from her before morning. The first calf was born just past midnight, its cry breaking into the stillness like a question pulled from the earth. Evelyn heard it from her window and lit the lantern without hesitation, her bare feet finding the floorboards before thought caught up. By the time she reached the barn, Harland was already there, kneeling in the straw beside the heifer. The calf lay slick and blinking beside its mother, legs trembling with the effort of its first breath. Harland looked up when she stepped inside, the lamplight catching the line of sweat at his temple. She did it clean, he said. No breach. Evelyn crouched beside him, her skirts trailing in the straw. It's a good sign, he nodded, watching the calf struggle to stand. Strong, too. They stayed there until the calf found its legs, wobbling toward its mother with a stubbornness Evelyn recognized deep in her chest. When they stepped out into the night again, the stars were clear and sharp above them, the air damp with afterbirth and spring. Harland glanced toward her, his voice quiet. You didn't hesitate. I didn't want to miss it. He looked at her a moment longer, then said, You never do. The next morning she rose early as always, but her steps carried a new certainty. In the kitchen, she opened the small drawer beside the stove and pulled out the folded map Harland had once left there, marked with hand-drawn lines and penciled notes about grazing routes and water sources. He came in from hauling wood, his shirt damp along the collar. She held the map out. I want to learn how this land works, she said. Not just ride fences or plant beans, I want to understand what keeps it alive. Harland took the map, his eyes searching hers. It's a long learning. I'm not leaving. He laid the map flat on the table, smoothing the creases with his palm. Then I'll show you. The hours that followed were steady and quiet. He taught her how the soil changed near the river bend where the cottonwoods grew thick, and how to read the clouds when the cattle went uneasy. She asked few questions, but remembered everything. That evening, they sat beneath the lean-to shed behind the barn, watching the light fade behind the hills. Harland rolled his sleeves to the elbows and poured water from the tin pitcher into a basin between them. Evelyn rinsed her hands, then passed the towel to him. I used to think places like this were only for people who'd done everything right, she said. The kind of folks who came from solid names and clean starts. Harland looked down at his hands. You still think that? I'm starting to see it different. He set the towel aside. Nothing here's perfect, but it's honest. That counts for something. A breeze moved through the tall grass, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Evelyn leaned back against the post behind her, one knee bent, fingers laced loosely in her lap. My mother used to tell me I'd marry a man who built things with his hands, she said. Said I needed someone who could hold a storm back just by standing still. Harland didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. Did you believe her? I think I wanted to. He looked down at the dirt between his boots, then back at her. Do you now? Evelyn didn't answer right away. Then she said, I believe in what I see. And I see a man who holds steady, no matter what's breaking around him. Harland held her gaze, the silence between them full of something unspoken but known. The next day they worked side by side repairing the windmill. Evelyn climbed the ladder first, hammer tucked into her belt, and Harland passed her the boards one by one. Her hands were sure on the wood, and she didn't flinch when a gust caught the loose edge of her skirt. At the top, she paused and looked out toward the horizon, the line of the river cutting between two low hills. Harland called up to her. "What do you see?" She took a breath. "Enough." That night, as they sat at the table eating boiled potatoes and beans, Evelyn reached across and laid her hand over his. No words, just skin against skin, quiet and certain. He turned his palm under hers, fingers closing gently. Neither of them spoke again until the lantern burned low. When she stood to clear the plates, he rose too, taking one from her hands. "You don't have to do everything yourself," he said. "I know," she said, "but I want to." As they moved around the kitchen in easy rhythm, the air between them felt different, not heavy, not expectant, just settled. Later, in the hush before dawn, Evelyn sat upright in bed and looked out through the open window. The moon was low, casting a pale wash across the barn roof. She didn't feel like a guest anymore. And for the first time since she'd woken to a stranger's voice telling her she was free, she believed she was. By midsummer, the garden had taken to the season with wild devotion beans climbing the trellis in tight coils, corn tasseling early, squash blossoms opening wide like they'd been waiting for someone to witness them. Evelyn wiped sweat from her brow as she rose from the rows, sun catching the edge of her jaw. She carried a basket full of cucumbers and early potatoes to the porch, where Harland was mending a latch that had grown loose on the front door. "You ought to let that wait," she called. "Too hot to be fussing with hinges." He didn't look up. "Door swung open last night with the wind, nearly woke the whole valley." She set the basket down and leaned against the post. "You ever think about putting up a second room on the house?" He paused, screwdriver held mid-turn. "For what?" She drew in a slow breath. "For me, if I'm staying." The tool lowered in his hand. "I thought you already were." "I know," she said, "but I'd like it to be mine too, not just a place where I was taken in." Harland stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Then we'll build it together." Not a room on the side. A second bedroom, off the back where the light comes in early, her mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "That's where I was thinking." They started the foundation that week, digging side by side with shovels and spades, measuring by rope and eye. Harland showed her how to square the corners using nothing more than string and stakes. She showed him how to set brick with a steadier hand. One morning, while fitting the first beam into place, Evelyn faltered on the ladder, her foot slipping on the top rung. Harland caught her wrist before the fall could take her. "You all right?" She nodded, heart racing. "Just missed the rail." "You don't have to climb if the height's no good." "I want to," she said. "I've never built walls that were mine to sleep behind." He didn't let go of her wrist right away. His thumb brushed the inside of it, just once. Then he helped her down, and they stood close enough to feel the heat rising from each other's skin. That night, she found him sitting by the stream, whittling. Fireflies blinked low over the water and frogs made quiet music from the reeds. She sat beside him, folding her skirt beneath her. "You always come down here when you can't sleep." Harland tilted the wood in his hand, revealing the start of a carved horse. "Started when I was a boy. Place calms the mind." She watched the blade move sure and slow. "What calms your heart?" He looked at her then. "You do, even when you don't mean to." Evelyn reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the carving. "You ever think you'd have another chance at this, at peace?" he asked. "No, at love," she said, voice quiet. He set the carving down gently. "I didn't think I'd want it again, until you." She turned toward him, her breath catching at the honesty in his face. "I don't want to be something you settle into because it's quiet." "You're not quiet," he said. "You're steady." "That's different." She leaned in then, not with hesitation but with knowing. Their lips met soft, then sure, the kind of kiss that didn't need apology. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not just on the land." "With you," his hand came up, gentle at the curve of her neck. "I want that too, every day." They married in August beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. No church, no preacher, just Harland's neighbor, a retired army man with a quiet voice and a steady hand. Evelyn wore a dress she'd dyed herself with onion skin and walnut, soft gold in the sun. Harland wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff and boots polished. After the vows, they shared cider and bread with the few who'd come to witness it. The carved horse sat on the edge of the table, finished now, with Evelyn's initials etched into the saddle. The new room was finished by September. Not large, but soaked in morning light and the scent of fresh pine. Evelyn filled it with quilts she'd sewn from old shirts and scraps Harland had offered up without protest. He built a bookshelf for her, rough-hewn but solid, and she filled it with the few volumes she'd carried from her mother's home long ago. As the weather cooled, their days eased into rhythm. Shared chores, shared meals, shared silences that felt like conversation. Evelyn taught Harland how to steep mint for aches. He taught her how to read the sky for the weight of snow. One evening, as the first frost silvered the grass, Harland came in from the barn and found her bent over the kitchen table, candlelight soft on her face. She looked up. "I was thinking about building a root cellar come spring." He hung up his coat. "I'll dig it with you." She reached for his hand. "You don't have to do everything with me." "I want to," he said. She stood then, her arms circling him slow and sure. "I never knew love could feel like this, like something earned." He held her close, his voice low against her temple. "That's what it is." They slept that night with the window open, the cold kept at bay by the heat of two bodies that had found their home in each other. No fear in their hearts, no weight left unspoken. Years later, the ranch bore new fences, a second barn, and a boy with Harland's quiet eyes and Evelyn's steady will. They raised him among horses and river songs, teaching him not just how to work the land, but how to love it and the people who made it home. And every morning, before the sun crested the hills, Harland would rise and press a kiss to Evelyn's shoulder as she stirred beside him, the promise of their first summer still living in the hush between their breaths. They didn't chase more than they needed, they built what mattered. And they stayed in love every single day.